A billionaire discovers twin girls sleeping in an abandoned car behind his mansion, but when he learns the truth they're hiding, he freezes and can barely breathe. The rain fell mercilessly over Robert Thompson's vast estate, turning the ground into a treacherous mix of mud and slippery grass. The 58-year-old billionaire, owner of the city's largest construction company, walked with determined steps, his imposing figure standing out against the surrounding darkness. His eyes, used to examining blueprints and million-dollar contracts, now scanned the familiar grounds of his mansion, searching for what. He wasn't entirely sure himself. It was then that an unexpected sound cut through the night air, almost drowned out by the drumming of the rain. Robert stopped, tense, his senses sharpened by sudden adrenaline. The sound came again, a faint moan, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere nearby. His eyes swept the darkness until they landed on a dark, rectangular shape, partially hidden by the dense vegetation at the back of his property. An abandoned car. Robert's heart raced as he cautiously approached the vehicle. The windows were fogged up, making it impossible to see inside. With a moment's hesitation, he touched the handle of the back door, feeling the cold, wet metal beneath his fingers. He took a deep breath and opened it. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. Curled up in the back seat, sleeping in a position that looked painfully uncomfortable, were two small girls, identical twins, no older than 4. Their blonde hair was tangled and dirty, clinging to their pale foreheads. Their clothes, once colorful, were now a jumble of stained, damp fabric. Robert froze, his mind struggling to process the surreal scene before him. The girls stirred, disturbed by the sudden rush of cold air and rain. One of them, the one closest to the door, slowly opened her eyes. The look she gave Robert was a mixture of fear and exhaustion that hit him like a punch to the stomach. That was when he noticed it. In the dim light of the car, illuminated only by occasional flashes of lightning, Robert saw dark marks on the girl's delicate arms, bruises. His stomach churned at the implication of what he was seeing. "Hello," he said softly, trying to keep his voice calm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "It's all right. You're safe now." His words seemed to awaken the other girl, who clung tightly to her sister. Their eyes met in a silent communication Robert couldn't decipher. It was as though a deep understanding passed between them without the need for words. The rain continued to fall, soaking Robert's back as he remained crouched by the car door. His mind raced, weighing his options. Calling the police seemed like the logical course of action, but something made him hesitate. The fear in the girl's eyes, the bruises, the abandoned car. Everything pointed to a much more complex and potentially dangerous situation. "You must be cold and hungry," he said, trying to keep his voice gentle. "How about we go inside? I have hot food and dry clothes in there." The girls looked at each other again, a silent conversation taking place in a matter of seconds. Finally, the one closest to the door gave a tiny nod. Carefully, Robert helped the two out of the car. They could barely stand, trembling from cold and exhaustion. Without thinking twice, he took off his coat and wrapped it around them both, creating a protective cocoon against the relentless rain. The walk to the mansion felt endless. Robert could feel their small bodies shaking against him, their fragility evident with each unsteady step. When they finally crossed the threshold of the main door, the warmth inside felt like a welcoming embrace. "Martha!" Robert called, his voice echoing through the mansion's corridors. The housekeeper appeared almost instantly, her eyes widening at the unexpected sight. "Mr. Thompson." "What on earth?" "We need towels, warm clothes, and something to eat," Robert interrupted, his tone leaving no room for questions. "Quickly, please." While Martha hurried to fulfill his request, Robert gently guided the girls into the living room. The fireplace crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The twins looked around with a mixture of awe and distrust, their small hands still tightly intertwined. Minutes later, wrapped in soft towels and wearing pajamas that seemed to swallow them up, the girls sat on the sofa, steaming cups of hot chocolate in their hands. Robert watched, fascinated, as they appeared to communicate with subtle looks and gestures. A raised eyebrow, a slight tilt of the head. It was as if they had their own private language, incomprehensible to the outside world. The silence was palpable, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional clink of cups. Robert knew he needed to do something, take some action, but what? Calling the authorities seemed like the obvious choice, yet something still made him hesitate. The fear in the girl's eyes, the bruises, the abandoned car, everything suggested a far more complex situation than it initially seemed. That was when a name came to mind. Susan Wright, the retired social worker he had met years ago during one of his charitable projects. If anyone could help in this delicate situation, it was her. Giving the twins a reassuring look, who were watching him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, Robert picked up his phone and stepped into the hallway. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number. "Susan, it's Robert Thompson. I'm sorry to call so late, but I have a situation here. I need your help." As he quietly explained the situation, Robert couldn't take his eyes off the two small figures on the sofa. The girls had finished their hot chocolate and were now fighting off sleep, their heads drooping to the sides. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Susan's resolute voice came through the line. "Don't do anything until I arrive." "And Robert, you did the right thing." Susan's words brought a small measure of relief, but anxiety still gnawed at Robert. Returning to the living room, he found the twins finally overcome by exhaustion, asleep in each other's arms. "Martha," he called softly. The housekeeper appeared silently at his side. "Please prepare the guest room. And keep this to yourself for now." Taking care not to wake them, Robert carried the girls upstairs. They looked so small and vulnerable in his arms, a painful reminder of the fragility of childhood. As he laid them on the king-size bed in the guest room, they instinctively snuggled closer to each other, as if seeking mutual protection even in sleep. Robert stood there for a long moment, watching them. Who were these children? Where had they come from? And more importantly, what had happened to them? The questions swirled in his mind, each bringing more doubts than answers. Closing the door softly behind him, Robert went downstairs, his body exhausted but his mind on high alert. The rain continued outside, a constant reminder of the surreal night he was living. In the living room, he poured himself a whiskey, his hands still trembling. The amber liquid burned his throat, but did little to calm his nerves. Robert Thompson, the man who had built an empire with his own hands, who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts without flinching, now felt completely lost. Minutes crawled by like hours as he waited for Susan. His eyes never left the clock, each tick echoing in his ears like a gong. What would happen when the sun came up? How would he explain the presence of two unknown children in his home? And what if someone was looking for them? The doorbell rang, snapping Robert out of his dark thoughts. He practically ran to the door, opening it to reveal Susan Wright, her grey hair disheveled by haste, her eyes shining with a mix of concern and determination. "Where are they?" were her first words upon entering. Robert led her upstairs, explaining in whispers the little he knew. When they opened the guest room door, the sight of the two girls sleeping peacefully seemed to melt something inside Susan. Her face, usually composed, showed raw emotion that Robert rarely witnessed. "Oh, poor little things," she murmured, moving closer to the bed with silent steps. Her experienced eyes scanned the children, noting the same disturbing details Robert had seen. "How long since you found them?" "A few hours," Robert replied quietly. "Susan, Matt, what should we do? Should I call the police?" Susan turned to him, her gaze serious. "Not yet. We need to understand the situation better before involving the authorities. These girls have been through something traumatic. That's clear. Rushing now could do more harm than good." Robert nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. Part of him wanted to hand over responsibility to others, but another part, a part he didn't know existed until that night, felt an almost visceral need to protect these children. "What do we do now?" he asked, feeling strangely vulnerable. Susan gave the sleeping girls one last look before guiding Robert back into the hallway. "Now, we wait. They need rest. In the morning, we'll try to establish some kind of communication. But Robert," she paused, her eyes meeting his intently, "you need to be prepared. Whatever happened to these girls won't be easy to hear." Susan's words weighed on Robert like a dark cloud. He nodded solemnly, feeling the burden of responsibility he had unintentionally taken on that rainy night. "I'll stay here tonight," Susan continued. "It'll be better to have a woman's presence when they wake up. You should try to get some rest, too." But Robert knew sleep would not come. Not that night. Not with the mystery of the two girls looming over him like an inescapable shadow. While Susan settled into another guest room, Robert returned to the living room. The rain had died down to a soft drizzle, and the first rays of sun began to tint the horizon with a pale pink. Sitting in his favorite armchair, his eyes fixed on the dying embers in the fireplace, Robert Thompson found himself in uncharted territory. His entire life had been devoted to building. Buildings, fortunes, legacies. But now, he faced the challenge of rebuilding something far more fragile and precious, the trust and security of two broken children. As the new day dawned, bringing with it both promise and uncertainty, Robert silently vowed to the two sleeping girls upstairs. No matter what came next, he would do everything in his power to protect them. The man who had spent a lifetime building an empire now faced his most important and challenging construction project, rebuilding two small, fragile lives, devastated by forces he did not yet understand. With that resolve firmly planted in his heart, Robert Thompson awaited the morning, ready to face whatever destiny had in store for him and the mysterious twins fate had placed in his path. The pre-dawn silence was abruptly broken by a sharp, desperate scream. "Dad! No! Please, stop!" Robert, who had barely managed to doze off in his armchair, jumped to his feet with a start. His heart hammered as he sprinted upstairs, 2 steps at a time. The scream came again, sharper and laden with terror. Reaching the guest room door, Robert hesitated for a moment. What would he find on the other side? How should he react? Before he could decide, the door opened, and Susan hurriedly slipped out, nearly bumping into him. "Stay here," she instructed firmly, stepping back into the room. Robert stood in the hallway, feeling completely powerless. Through the slightly open door, he could see Susan sitting on the edge of the bed, her soft, calming voice breaking through the darkness. "It's all right, sweetheart. It was just a bad dream. You're safe here." Emily, Robert assumed it was her, sobbed uncontrollably, her small body shaking violently. Olivia sat beside her sister, eyes wide with fear, clinging to a worn, tattered teddy bear as though her life depended on it. "Breathe with me, Emily," Susan gently instructed. "Like this. See? Inhale. Exhale." Gradually, Emily's sobs subsided, turning into occasional sniffles. Robert watched in awe as Susan managed to soothe the child so skillfully. He felt like an intruder, unable to offer any real help. "You two have been through a lot, haven't you?" Susan said softly, looking from Emily to Olivia. "But now you're safe. No one is going to hurt you here." Olivia, who had remained silent until then, mumbled something so softly that Robert could barely hear it. "What was that, sweetheart?" Susan asked gently. "We ran away from the monster," Olivia repeated, her trembling voice barely above a whisper. Robert felt his stomach turn. Monster. The word hung in the air, weighted with terrible implications. Susan nodded understandingly. "You were both very brave, and you did the right thing by looking for help." Emily sniffled, rubbing her eyes. "He's going to find us," she said, fear evident in her voice. "He always does." "Not this time," Susan assured her, her tone firm but kind. "You're protected here. Mr. Thompson and I will take care of you." Hearing his name, Robert felt compelled to enter the room. The girls looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "That's right," he said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the swirl of emotions within him. "You're safe here, I promise." Olivia clutched the teddy bear tighter, her eyes studying Robert intently. Emily scooted closer to Susan. "It's all right," Susan reassured them. "Mr. Thompson is a friend. He wants to help." Robert approached the bed slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. He knelt beside it so he was at the girl's eye level. "Hello," he said softly. "I know you must be very scared right now, but I want you to know that in this house, no one will hurt you. You're safe." Emily and Olivia exchanged a look, that silent communication Robert had noticed before. After a moment, Emily spoke, her voice barely audible. "Promise?" Robert's heart clenched at the vulnerability in that single question. "I promise," he replied, pouring every ounce of sincerity he had into his voice. Susan smiled encouragingly. "How about trying to get a little more sleep? It's almost dawn." The girls nodded reluctantly. Susan helped them lie down again, covering them with a blanket. "If you have another nightmare, just call for me, okay?" Susan said. "I'll be in the next room." Robert and Susan left the room quietly, leaving the door slightly open. In the hallway, they exchanged worried looks. "What do you think?" Robert asked in a hushed tone. Susan let out a heavy sigh. "It's worse than I feared. These girls have gone through severe trauma, Robert. Their fear is palpable. And this monster they keep mentioning? Probably the father," Susan concluded, her voice laden with sadness and restrained anger. "All the signs are there. Emily's nightmare, the bruises, the intense fear." Robert felt a wave of nausea at the thought of what those innocent children must have endured. "What do we do now?" "For now, we earn their trust," Susan answered. "They need to feel safe before we can make any real progress. Tomorrow we'll try a more structured approach. Maybe with some drawings or toys, we can help them express themselves in a way that's less frightening." Robert nodded, feeling both determined and completely out of his depth. "And what about the authorities?" Susan hesitated. "Not yet. We need more information first. If we bring the authorities in prematurely, we risk further traumatizing the girls. Besides, if the father really is the abuser, he may have connections that could make it harder for us to protect them." The idea of keeping the girls hidden from the authorities made Robert uneasy, but he trusted Susan's judgment. "All right, we'll follow your lead on this." "Try to get some rest," Susan advised. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Robert went back to his room, but sleep evaded him. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind filled with images of the frightened girls and the monster who terrorized them. For the first time in years, Robert Thompson felt truly powerless. When the first rays of sunlight began filtering through the curtains, Robert was already on his feet. He went down to the kitchen, where Martha was preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she greeted, giving him a curious look. She clearly had questions about the unexpected visitors, but was too discreet to ask directly. "Good morning, Martha," Robert replied. "Could you prepare a special breakfast today? Something kids would like." Martha nodded, a small smile on her lips. "Of course, sir. How about pancakes with strawberry syrup and hot chocolate?" Robert smiled, grateful for Martha's silent understanding. "Perfect, thank you." A little while later, Susan came down looking as tired as Robert felt. "The girls are still asleep," she informed him. "It's best to let them rest as much as possible." They ate breakfast in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was almost noon when they heard hesitant footsteps on the stairs. Robert and Susan exchanged glances before getting up to greet the twins. Emily and Olivia stood at the bottom of the staircase, holding hands, looking around with a mix of fear and curiosity. In the daylight, the bruises on their arms were even more pronounced, making Robert's stomach churn. "Good morning, girls," Susan greeted them warmly. "You must be hungry. How about some pancakes?" The girls nodded shyly, following Susan to the kitchen. Robert trailed behind, noticing how they moved in perfect sync, as if they were one entity in two bodies. During breakfast, Susan used subtle techniques to try establishing a connection with the twins. She asked simple, non-threatening questions, praised the shapes they made with the syrup on their pancakes, and told funny stories about her own childhood. Gradually, the girls began to relax a bit. Though they still spoke little, their expressions were less fearful, and they even managed a few small smiles now and then. After the meal, Susan suggested they move to the living room. She had brought along a suitcase full of toys and art supplies, which she now spread out on the floor. "How about we draw some pictures?" she suggested cheerfully. The twins sat on the floor, each taking a piece of paper and some colored pencils. Robert watched from his armchair, fascinated by Susan's ability to create a welcoming, safe space. As they drew, Susan casually chatted with the girls, asking seemingly innocent questions, carefully crafted to glean information. "That's a beautiful picture, Emily. she commented. "Is that your house?" Emily shook her head. "That's Grandma's house," she murmured. "Oh, you like visiting Grandma?" Susan asked gently. Olivia, who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. "Grandma doesn't let the monster in." Robert and Susan exchanged meaningful looks. It was the second time the twins had mentioned a monster. "This monster," Susan said carefully. "Does he live in your house?" The twins stopped drawing, their bodies growing visibly tense. Emily grabbed Olivia's hand. "It's all right," Susan reassured them. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." There was a tense moment of silence before Emily spoke, her voice barely audible. "He gets angry when he drinks from his special bottle." Robert's heart twisted. The picture the girls were painting was terribly clear, even in vague details. "You were very brave to run away," Susan said gently. "And very smart to look for help." Olivia looked at Robert, her big, serious eyes studying him. "You won't let the monster get us, will you?" The question hit Robert like a punch in the gut. He knelt down next to them, looking into their eyes. "No," he said firmly. "I promise I'll protect you. The monster won't hurt you again." The twins exchanged a look, that silent communication Robert found so captivating. Then, to his surprise, both stood up and hugged him. The gesture caught Robert off guard, but he returned the hug gently, a lump forming in his throat. In that moment, he knew his life had changed irrevocably. No matter what happened next, he would do whatever it took to keep that promise. Susan watched the scene with a mix of relief and worry. They had taken the crucial first steps to earn the girls' trust, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. The twins' revelations, though vague, painted a bleak picture of abuse and neglect. While the girls returned to their drawings, now with slightly more enthusiasm, Susan and Robert exchanged looks charged with determination. They knew they had a tough battle ahead, but they were committed to doing whatever was necessary to protect Emily and Olivia. The day went on, filled with moments of progress and setbacks. The twins alternated between periods of relative openness and moments of withdrawal and fear. Every new detail they shared, however small, helped Susan and Robert piece together the puzzle of their lives. As evening approached, Robert found himself reflecting on how drastically his life had changed in less than 24 hours. The man who once concerned himself mostly with contracts and profits was now completely invested in the well-being of two little girls fate had thrust into his life. Watching Emily and Olivia doze off on the sofa, exhausted after an emotionally draining day, Robert made a silent promise. He would use every resource at his disposal, his money, his connections, his influence, to ensure those children had a chance at a safe and happy life. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with legal and emotional obstacles, but gazing at the peaceful, sleeping faces of Emily and Olivia, Robert Thompson knew every challenge would be worth it. After the exhausting session with the twins, Robert retreated to his office, quietly shutting the door behind him. The silence of the room contrasted starkly with the whirlwind of emotions raging inside him. He headed to the small bar in the corner, his hands trembling slightly as he poured himself a whiskey. The amber liquid burned down his throat, but did little to calm his frayed nerves. Robert sank into his leather chair, eyes fixed on the landscape beyond the window, yet not truly seeing it. The girl's revelations echoed in his mind, each word a painful blow to his conscience. He gets angry when he drinks from his special bottle. The phrase, spoken with such innocent fear by Emily, unleashed an avalanche of memories Robert had tried to bury for decades. Suddenly, he was no longer in his luxurious office, but back in the small house of his childhood, cowering in a corner, listening to shouting and the sound of breaking glass. Robert squeezed his eyes shut, his breathing growing uneven. He could almost smell the cheap liquor and sweat, hear the heavy, unsteady footsteps of his father drawing near. The fear, the helplessness, the shame. It all came rushing back with crushing intensity. "You're worthless, Robert, a failure." His father's voice, harsh and full of contempt, echoed in his mind. Robert opened his eyes abruptly, struggling to anchor himself in the present. His gaze drifted around the room, landing on the framed diplomas, the photos of inaugurations of large developments, and the Entrepreneur of the Year awards. An entire life spent proving his worth, distancing himself from the frightened boy he once was. And now, two small girls had torn down all the carefully constructed walls, exposing a wound that had never truly healed. Robert stood up abruptly, unable to remain still. He walked over to the window, observing the meticulously landscaped garden below. Somewhere in the house, Emily and Olivia were with Susan, probably still drawing or maybe playing. The thought of them possibly smiling, even momentarily, tightened his chest. He remembered the hug the girls had given him earlier, such a simple gesture yet so profoundly impactful. How could they trust him, a stranger, after all they had been through? Their resilience haunted and inspired him. With a heavy sigh, Robert returned to his desk. He knew he couldn't afford to lose himself in his own painful memories. The twins needed him now, and he was determined not to fail them the way the adults in his own childhood had failed him. Robert powered on his computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he began a discreet investigation. Years of building an empire had given him connections in practically every sector of the city. It was time to use those resources for a greater purpose than business. He started with a basic search for Mike Johnson in the area, cross-referencing data with birth records for twins in the past 5 years. The list of results was long, but Robert was determined. He refined his search, adding filters, cross-checking information. As he worked, part of his mind drifted to the floor below, where Susan was with the girls. He wondered how they were doing, whether sharing their secret had provided any relief. Robert made a mental note to check in with Susan later, eager for any sign of progress. After hours of meticulous searching, a pattern began to emerge. Robert leaned forward, his eyes scanning the information on the screen. Mike Johnson, 35, father of 4-year-old twins, a patchwork employment history, short stints mostly in construction and local bars. What really caught Robert's attention, however, was the multiple police incidents. None that resulted in serious convictions, but a clear pattern of problematic behavior. Disturbing the peace, driving under the influence, bar fights. Each incident painted an increasingly grim picture. Robert leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The image forming was disheartening. Mike Johnson seemed exactly like the man Robert feared, unstable, with an alcohol problem, potentially violent. One detail in particular stood out. In the past few months, Mike had been fired from 3 consecutive jobs, all for unexcused absences and suspected on-the-job drunkenness. The last job had ended just a week before Robert found the girls. Robert's mind raced, connecting the dots. The job loss could have been the trigger for a particularly violent episode. Was that what finally drove the twins to run away? He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he almost didn't hear the soft knock on the door. Susan came in, her face showing signs of fatigue but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "How are they?" Robert asked immediately, standing up. Susan gave a gentle smile. "Better than I expected, actually. After sharing a bit about the monster, they seem more relaxed, like a weight's been lifted off their shoulders." Robert nodded, feeling a mix of relief and worry. "Did they say anything else?" "Not much," Susan replied, sitting down in one of the chairs across from Robert's desk. "But their actions speak louder than words. They're playing now, Robert. Really playing, like kids their age should. It's incredible to see, considering where we were yesterday." Robert felt a lump in his throat. The thought of Emily and Olivia having a moment of carefree joy after everything they had endured was deeply moving. "And you?" Susan asked, her perceptive eyes studying Robert's face. "How are you handling all this?" Robert hesitated. Part of him wanted to maintain his composure, to be the strong, controlled man he had always prided himself on being. But something in Susan's kindness broke down his defenses. "It's hard," he admitted, his voice low. "Hearing what they went through, seeing the fear in their eyes, it brings back memories I'd rather forget." Susan nodded sympathetically. "Your own childhood," Robert confirmed with a nod. "My father, he wasn't much different from the monster the girls described. The special bottle was a constant presence in our house." "I'm sorry, Robert," Susan said gently, "but maybe that experience, painful as it is, makes you the perfect person to help Emily and Olivia. You understand on a level few can what they're going through." Susan's words struck Robert deeply. He had never viewed his past as anything positive, but now, seeing it through this new lens, he began to understand. Maybe, just maybe, all the pain and struggle of his childhood had prepared him for this moment, to be the protector these girls so desperately needed. "Thank you, Susan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without your guidance in this situation." Susan smiled warmly. "We're a team now, Robert. These girls need both of us." Robert nodded, feeling a new determination solidify within him. He turned to his computer, sharing with Susan what he'd discovered about Mike Johnson. As he laid out his findings, Susan's expression grew increasingly serious. "This confirms our suspicions," she said when Robert finished. "Mike Johnson seems to be exactly what we feared." "What do we do now?" Robert asked, feeling both relieved to have concrete information and apprehensive about the next steps. Susan thought for a moment. "We have to be careful. If Mike is as volatile as he seems, any rash move on our part could provoke him, making him even more dangerous." Robert agreed. "And the girls, how much should we tell them?" "For now, the least possible," Susan answered. "They already took a big step by sharing what they did. We need to keep building their trust and sense of safety before pressing for more details." Robert stood and walked to the window again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, Mike Johnson was likely searching for his daughters. The thought made Robert's stomach churn. "We can't just keep them here indefinitely, can we?" he asked. Though he knew the protective impulse behind the question was impractical, Susan sighed. "I understand how you feel, Robert, but taking them without legal process, even with the best intentions, is still against the law. We need to handle this the right way, no matter how hard or frustrating it might be." Robert acknowledged the wisdom in Susan's words. "Right. So what's the next step?" "We keep building our relationship with the girls," Susan replied. "We earn more of their trust, try to gather more details about their home situation. Meanwhile, you can use your connections to keep an eye on Mike Johnson discreetly. The more we know, the better prepared we'll be to protect Emily and Olivia legally." The plan made sense to Robert, though part of him wanted more immediate action. He knew Susan was right. Rushing could jeopardize everything. "Okay," he agreed. "Step by step." Susan stood, placing a reassuring hand on Robert's shoulder. "You're doing an incredible job, Robert. Those girls are lucky to have you on their side." Her words brought a lump to Robert's throat. He thought of the frightened boy he once was, desperately wishing someone had stepped in to save him. Now, decades later, he had the chance to be that someone for Emily and Olivia. "Let's go back downstairs," Susan suggested. "I'm sure the girls will be happy to see you." Robert agreed, following her out of the office. As they descended the stairs, he could hear soft laughter coming from the living room. The sound was like music to his ears, a reminder of what was at stake and why every effort was worth it. Entering the living room, Robert saw Emily and Olivia seated on the floor, surrounded by colorful drawings and toys. When they saw him, their faces lit up with shy but genuine smiles. "Mr. Robert," Emily called, holding up a drawing. "Look what I made." Robert knelt beside them, his heart swelling with an emotion he could barely name. "It's beautiful, Emily," he said softly. As the girls proudly showed off their creations, Robert felt a certainty grow within him. No matter what came next, no matter how difficult the battle ahead, he would do everything in his power to ensure these smiles, this innocent joy, would never again be stolen from Emily and Olivia. The weight of the truth about his past and about the girls' situation still lingered, a heavy burden on his shoulders. But now, looking at Emily and Olivia's hopeful faces, Robert knew it was a burden he would gladly carry if it meant a better future for them. Night fell over Robert Thompson's mansion, bringing a stillness that starkly contrasted with the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. Sitting in his office, Robert stared at the computer screen, his eyes burning with fatigue, yet he couldn't rest. The information he had discovered about Mike Johnson flickered on the screen, each detail a silent accusation. Multiple reports of domestic violence, several run-ins with the police for drunkenness and public disorder, and a string of lost jobs due to alcoholism. The picture it painted was of a dangerously unstable man, completely unfit to raise two small, vulnerable girls. Robert closed his eyes, rubbing his temples in a futile attempt to ward off the headache forming. The dilemma he faced seemed impossible. On one hand, his rational mind told him the correct course of action was to contact the authorities immediately. After all, he was sheltering two missing children, potentially placing himself in legal jeopardy. On the other hand, his heart and the painful memories of his own childhood compelled him to protect Emily and Olivia at all costs. The thought of handing them over to a system that might fail to protect them terrified him. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Susan entered, her face showing exhaustion but eyes still alert and concerned. The girls finally fell asleep, she informed him, taking a seat in front of Robert's desk. But it wasn't easy. They're scared, Robert. Terribly scared. Robert nodded grimly. I found more on their father, he said, turning the computer screen so Susan could see. It's worse than we imagined. Susan read the information quickly, her face growing more somber by the moment. My God, she murmured. Those poor children. What do we do, Susan? Robert asked, his voice revealing his anguish. Legally, I know I should contact the police, but you're afraid the system will fail them, Susan completed softly. Robert nodded. I've seen it happen. Kids sent right back into abusive homes, slipping through the cracks in the system, and with Mike Johnson's track record, who's to say he won't use connections or manipulation to regain custody? Susan let out a heavy sigh. I share your concern, Robert, but we also have to consider the legal implications of keeping the girls here without notifying anyone. If we're caught, we could be charged with kidnapping, no matter how noble our intentions. Susan's words weighed on Robert. He stood, walking over to the window and looking out into the dark night. Somewhere, Mike Johnson was probably searching for his daughters. The thought made Robert's stomach churn. I can't give them up, Susan, he finally said, his voice low but firm. Not after what I've seen in their eyes, not after promising I'd protect them. Susan studied him for a long moment, her expression a mix of understanding and concern. Robert, I understand. Believe me, I do. But we have to think about the long term. If we break the law, no matter how well-intentioned, we could undermine our ability to help them down the road. Robert turned to respond, but was interrupted by a soft sound. They both turned to see Emily and Olivia standing at the office door, hand in hand, their eyes wide with fear. Are you sending us back? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Robert's heart broke at the terror in their eyes. He knelt down, opening his arms. Come here, sweethearts. The twins rushed to him, throwing themselves into his arms with a desperation born of fear. Robert held them tightly, feeling their little bodies shaking. Please don't send us back, Olivia pleaded, her voice muffled against Robert's chest. The monster will hurt us again. Susan joined them, gently stroking the girls' backs. No one's going to hurt you, sweethearts. We're here to protect you. Robert looked at Susan over the girls' heads, a decision hardening in his eyes. I won't hand them over, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. No matter what. Susan opened her mouth to argue, but something in Robert's expression made her pause. She recognized that look. She had seen it countless times in parents determined to protect their children at all costs. What do you propose, then? She finally asked. Robert took a deep breath, his mind racing. I'll use my influence. I have connections in social services, at the mayor's office. I can pull some strings, buy us time while we build a solid case against Mike Johnson. Susan frowned. Robert, that's risky. If anyone finds out, it's a risk I'm willing to take, Robert interrupted. He looked down at the girls in his arms, their hearts pounding against his chest. They deserve a chance, Susan, a real chance at safety and happiness. Susan looked at the twins, then back at Robert. She saw the determination in his eyes, the fierce protectiveness in his embrace. Slowly, she nodded. All right, she agreed. But we have to be extremely careful. One misstep, and we could lose everything. Robert nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger, both legal and ethical. But looking at Emily and Olivia, seeing the trust and hope in their eyes, he knew every risk would be worth it. "Let's take them back to bed," Susan suggested gently. "We'll start planning our next steps in the morning," Robert agreed, standing with the girls still clinging to him. They held on to him as though their lives depended on it, and in a way, perhaps they did. As they walked back to the girls' room, Robert felt the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders. He was about to step into dangerous territory, defying the law in the name of what he believed was right. Part of him was terrified of the potential consequences, but another part, the part that remembered the scared little boy he once was, knew he could do no less. Placing Emily and Olivia gently back into bed, Robert tucked them in. "You're safe here," he promised softly. "No one will take you away." The girls looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and residual fear. "Promise?" Emily asked, her small voice cutting through the darkness of the room. "I promise," Robert answered, feeling the weight of that promise in every fiber of his being. When they finally left the room, Robert and Susan exchanged loaded glances. They both knew they had crossed a line, embarking on a path that could have serious repercussions. "I'll make some calls in the morning," Robert said as they descended the stairs. "I have a friend in the city's legal department who might give us some quiet guidance." Susan nodded. "In the meantime, I'll keep working with the girls. The more information we can get about their home life, the stronger we'll be when we finally go to the authorities." Robert paused at the foot of the stairs, turning to Susan. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Susan gave him a tired but genuine smile. "We're a team now, Robert. Those girls need us." That night, lying in bed but unable to sleep, Robert reflected on the path he had chosen. He knew the days ahead would be full of challenges, difficult decisions, and painful consequences. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily and Olivia's faces, heard their voices pleading for protection. And in those moments, all doubts vanished. He would do whatever it took to keep those girls safe, to give them the childhood he never had. The frightened boy inside him, the one who had no one to fight for him, had finally found his voice. With that resolve firmly planted in his heart, Robert finally drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever the dawn would bring. The battle for Emily and Olivia's safety and happiness was just beginning, but he was determined to win it at any cost. The sun had barely risen when Robert was already in his office, phone pressed to his ear. "John, I know it's early, but I need your help," he said, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the girls. "It's a delicate situation." On the other end of the line, John Peterson, a well-respected attorney and longtime friend of Robert's, listened attentively as the situation was explained. "Robert," he finally said, "you realize how dangerous this territory is, don't you?" "Completely," Robert replied firmly. "But I can't just stand by and do nothing." There was a long sigh on the other end. "All right, I can't promise anything, but I'll see what I can do to buy some time. Meanwhile, document everything. Every bruise, every word the girls say about the abuse. We'll need a strong case." Robert thanked him, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. As he hung up, he saw Susan standing in the doorway of the office. "The girls are still asleep," she said. "How did the call go?" Robert quickly updated her on his conversation with John. Susan listened intently, her face reflecting both worry and determination. "It's a start," she said finally. "But Robert, we have to be extremely cautious. One wrong move, and we could lose everything." Robert nodded grimly. "I know, but I can't let them go back to that situation, Susan. I just can't." Before Susan could respond, the sound of small footsteps caught both their attention. Emily and Olivia appeared in the office doorway, still in their pajamas, eyes wide and anxious. "Good morning, sweethearts," Susan greeted them warmly. "Did you sleep well?" The girls nodded timidly, their eyes flicking between Susan and Robert. It was Olivia who spoke, her voice almost a whisper. Are we still allowed to stay?" Robert's heart clenched at the vulnerability in that question. He knelt down, meeting their gaze. "Of course you can," he assured them. "You're safe here, I promised. Remember." The twins exchanged a look, that silent communication again before they both moved forward and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Robert," Emily mumbled against his shoulder. In that moment, looking at Susan over the girls' heads, Robert felt his resolve solidify even more. No matter how hard the road ahead, he would do everything in his power to keep Emily and Olivia safe. The day that followed was a mix of careful planning and unexpected moments of tenderness. While Robert made more phone calls, strategically positioning pieces to create a protective net around the girls, Susan gently worked with them, using therapeutic techniques to help them feel safe enough to share more about their life at home. As evening approached, Robert again reflected on how drastically his life had changed in so short a time. The man who once primarily worried about contracts and profits was now completely absorbed in the well-being of two little girls fate had brought to his door. Watching Emily and Olivia play peacefully in the living room, their faces lit with smiles that appeared more frequently with each passing day, Robert knew he had made the right decision. The path ahead would be difficult, full of legal and ethical challenges, but looking at those innocent faces, he knew every challenge, every risk, would be worth it. With a determined sigh, Robert returned to his office. There was much work to do, many battles to fight, but for the first time in his life he felt he was fighting for something truly important. And he was ready to give his all in that fight. The sound of the television cut through the quiet morning in Robert Thompson's mansion. The local news anchor spoke urgently. Twin 4-year-old girls, Emily and Olivia Johnson, have been reported missing. The police ask that anyone with information come forward immediately. Robert felt his stomach drop. The situation he had feared was coming to pass. He exchanged a worried look with Susan, who was seated beside him on the sofa. "It started?" he murmured, his voice tense. Susan nodded gravely. "We have to be ready. The police will probably start searching the area soon." As if to confirm her words, Robert's phone rang. It was his contact at the local police department, informing him that search teams would be dispatched to canvass the neighborhood. Robert ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation. "I need to reinforce security," he said, standing abruptly. "We can't take any chances." While Robert made calls to install additional cameras and hire more security personnel, Susan occupied the girls, keeping them distracted with games and drawings. She watched them closely, noticing how Emily and Olivia seemed more relaxed, more willing to speak. You know," Emily said, coloring a picture, "this place is way nicer than home." Olivia agreed enthusiastically. "It is. There's no yelling here, and the food is good." Susan's heart twisted at those simple yet revealing words. "You didn't like the food at home?" she asked gently. The twins exchanged looks. "Sometimes there wasn't any food," Olivia murmured. "Daddy forgot to buy it." Susan made mental notes, knowing each detail might be crucial to building a strong case. Meanwhile, Robert watched from his office window, tense, as police cars slowly drove by outside. His phone rang again. It was John, his attorney. "Robert, things are heating up," John said without preamble. "Mike Johnson is making a scene. He's drunk, wandering around the neighborhood, making accusations and threats." Robert clenched his fists. "Is he close to here?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time." "Robert, you need to be extremely careful. If he finds out..." "I know, John. I'm taking every precaution I can." After hanging up, Robert went downstairs to inform Susan of the new developments. He found her in the kitchen preparing a snack for the girls. "Susan," he began in a low voice, "Mike Johnson is nearby, drunk and making threats." Susan's face paled slightly. "Oh God, the girls." "They're safe," Robert assured her. "I've reinforced security. No one gets in without my express permission." Susan nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Robert, I've been thinking, what if we try to contact the girl's mother separately, Jennifer Johnson? She might be a crucial ally." Robert considered the idea. "You think she could also be a victim?" "Very likely. The way the girls talk, there are subtle signs their mother was also abused." Robert felt a wave of nausea thinking about how extensive that family's suffering might be. "All right, see what you can find out about Jennifer, but be discreet." While Susan began her search for Jennifer Johnson, Robert turned his attention back to the twins. He found them in the playroom, laughing as they assembled a giant puzzle. "Hello, girls," he said, sitting on the floor beside them. "Having fun?" Emily smiled shyly. Yes, Mr. Robert, we've never had so many toys before. The comment, delivered so innocently, struck Robert like a punch to the gut. He struggled to maintain his composure. Well, you can play with whatever you like here. Olivia, normally the quieter of the two, surprised Robert by speaking up. Mr. Robert, you're rich, right? Robert blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. Well, I've been fortunate. Yes. Daddy always said rich people were mean, Olivia continued, her voice low. But you're not mean. Robert felt a lump form in his throat. No, sweetie, not all rich people are mean, just like not all poor people are good. What matters is how we treat each other. The girls seemed to ponder this for a moment. Then Emily spoke, her voice trembling slightly. Daddy didn't treat us well. Robert's heart broke at those words. He was about to respond when he heard the doorbell ring. Instantly, he tensed. Stay here, okay? I'll see who it is. Robert went to the front door, where he found Susan already speaking to a man in a suit. Mr. Thompson, the man introduced himself. I'm Detective Harris. We're investigating the disappearance of 2 young girls in the area. May I ask you a few questions? Robert felt his heart race, but he kept his composure. Of course, Detective. How can I help? The interrogation lasted almost an hour. Robert answered carefully, revealing as little as possible while trying not to appear suspicious. When the detective finally left, Robert closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. Susan approached, worry evident on her face. Do you think he suspected anything? Robert shook his head. I'm not sure, but he was asking very specific questions about unusual movements on the property in recent days. Robert, Susan said gently, maybe we should consider telling the truth. If we're caught hiding the girls— No! Robert interrupted more harshly than he intended. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I'm sorry, it's just— You didn't see the look in their eyes when they talked about their father. I can't risk them being sent back to that— Susan nodded sympathetically. I understand. But we need a plan if things escalate. At that moment, Susan's phone rang. She answered quickly, her eyes widening as she listened. I see. Yes, thank you for letting me know. Hanging up, she turned to Robert. I found some information on Jennifer Johnson. Robert, she's in the hospital. What? What happened? Apparently, she was admitted a few days ago with injuries consistent with severe domestic abuse. She's in serious condition. Robert felt a mixture of horror and rage. My God, that monster. This changes everything, Susan said, her mind working quickly. If Jennifer recovers, she could be our best chance at obtaining legal custody of the girls. Robert nodded, feeling a spark of hope amid the chaos. Right, I'll use my connections to make sure she gets the best treatment possible. In the meantime, we need to keep the girls safe and out of sight. While Robert made more phone calls, Susan returned to check on the twins. She found them quiet, clearly having overheard part of the conversation. It's all right, sweethearts, she assured them, sitting down between them. Emily looked at Susan, tears in her eyes. Is Mommy hurt? Susan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Your mom is in the hospital, but the doctors are taking very good care of her. Olivia clutched her teddy bear tightly. Was it Daddy? Did he hurt Mommy the way he hurt us? Susan felt her heart break. She put her arms around both girls, feeling their small bodies tremble with contained sobs. You two are very brave, you know that. And you're safe now. Mister, Robert and I will take care of you and your mum. As she comforted the twins, Susan heard Robert in the hallway, his voice tense on the phone. She knew they were walking a fine line between right and wrong, but looking at Emily and Olivia, she couldn't help but feel they were doing the right thing. Night fell over the mansion, bringing with it a tense stillness. Robert and Susan met in the kitchen after putting the girls to bed. So what now? Susan asked, her voice tired. Robert sighed heavily. We keep going. We protect the girls. We take care of Jennifer, and we pray we can resolve this legally before it's too late. Meanwhile, outside the estate, a staggering figure watched the mansion through eyes clouded by alcohol and rage. Mike Johnson muttered to himself, his words slurred. I know you're in there, you little brats. Daddy's gonna find you. The search had intensified, and the net was closing in. For Robert and Susan, The race against time to save Emily and Olivia had only just begun. Dawn's first light had barely started creeping into Robert Thompson's mansion when he and Susan met in his office. Both had dark circles under their eyes, evidence of sleepless nights and constant worry. "We need a concrete plan," Robert said, his voice brimming with determination. "We can't keep reacting to events. We need to get ahead of them." Susan nodded, spreading some papers out on the desk. "Agreed. First, we need to establish contact with Jennifer. She's the key to all of this." Robert picked up the phone, fingers hovering over the numbers. "I have a contact at the hospital. He can help us speak with her discreetly." While Robert made the call, Susan organized her notes. Minutes later, he hung up, a spark of hope in his eyes. "Jennifer is conscious. My contact will let us talk to her by phone in an hour." The next hour passed slowly as Robert and Susan refined their approach. When the phone finally rang, they both jumped. "Hello?" Jennifer's voice was weak but audible. "Mrs. Johnson? This is Robert Thompson. Your daughters Emily and Olivia are safe with me." There was a moment of tense silence, followed by a muffled sob. "They're okay, please. Tell me they're okay." "They're safe and well cared for," Susan interjected softly. "Mrs. Johnson, we know you've been through something terrible. We're here to help you and your daughters." Over the next few minutes, Jennifer, amidst tears, confirmed their suspicions about Mike's abuse. She begged them to keep the girls away from him. "We'll do everything in our power to protect them," Robert promised. "But we need your help. Are you willing to testify against Mike?" Jennifer's response was immediate and firm. "Yes. Enough is enough. My girls deserve better." With Jennifer's cooperation secured, Robert and Susan moved on to the next steps of their plan. Robert engaged his contacts in social services and the district attorney's office. "We need to expedite protective measures," he explained to Susan. "With Jennifer's testimony and the evidence we've gathered from the girls, we have a real chance at gaining emergency custody." Susan agreed. "And with Mike now under scrutiny by the authorities, the investigation should shift focus. That gives us some breathing room." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Robert made countless phone calls, using his influence to speed up processes that normally took weeks. Susan, meanwhile, prepared a detailed report on the girls' emotional and physical state, documenting every sign of abuse. By mid-afternoon, they received the news they'd been hoping for. The authorities had opened an investigation into Mike Johnson. His erratic behavior and history of domestic violence had raised red flags. "This is our chance," Robert said, a mixture of relief and determination in his voice. "With Mike under the microscope, we can present our case for custody of the girls without immediate fear of retaliation." Susan nodded but still wore a worried expression. "What if he tries something desperate?" "I've planned for that," Robert replied, showing her some documents. "I hired extra security and obtained a temporary restraining order. Mike can't come near this property or the hospital where Jennifer is." As they discussed next steps, they heard laughter coming from the garden. Surprised by the unusual sound, they both headed to the window. Outside, Emily and Olivia were playing on the grass, their faces lit with genuine smiles for the first time since their arrival. Martha, the housekeeper, watched them carefully, joining in their game. "Look at them," Susan whispered, moved. "They're starting to feel safe here." Robert felt a knot in his throat. Seeing the girls smiling and acting like normal children reaffirmed his determination to protect them at all costs. "That's why we're doing this," he said softly. "So they can have a real childhood, free from fear and abuse." In that moment, watching Emily and Olivia playing carefree, Robert and Susan felt renewed energy to continue their plan. The road ahead was still uncertain and full of obstacles, but seeing the first signs of the girls' recovery made every challenge worth facing. With one last look at the smiling twins, they returned to their work, more determined than ever to secure a safe and happy future for Emily and Olivia. The plan was in motion, and for the first time since this all began, they felt the tide finally turning in their favor. The sky darkened quickly over Robert Thompson's mansion, heavy clouds gathering on the horizon, heralding an approaching storm. The charged atmosphere seemed to mirror the growing tension enveloping the estate. Robert sat in his office, eyes fixed on the security camera feed displayed on his computer. His body was tense, muscles rigid with the anticipation of imminent danger. Only a few hours earlier, he had received the news he dreaded. Mike Johnson had discovered leads pointing to the mansion. A distant rumble of thunder made Robert jump. He picked up the phone, dialing the hospital number quickly. "Jennifer," he said as soon as the call connected. "We have to move fast. Mike is getting close." On the other end of the line, Jennifer's voice sounded determined despite the underlying fear. "I'm ready, Mr. Thompson. I'll testify against him and fight for full custody of the girls. I can't let them go back to that hell." Robert felt a mixture of relief and concern. "Thank you, Jennifer. I'll make sure you have the best protection possible. Hang in there." Ending the call, Robert stood and walked to the window. Raindrops began to fall, first scattered, soon forming a dense curtain. He watched the extra security guards he had hired patrolling the perimeter of the property, their figures almost indistinguishable in the deepening darkness. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Susan entered, her face etched with worry. "The girls are restless," she informed him. "I think they can sense something's wrong." Robert nodded grimly. "They've always been perceptive. How are they acting?" Susan sighed, running a hand through her graying hair. "They're quieter, more frightened. Or Emily had another nightmare last night, and Olivia has barely left her side since. It's like they've regressed to the state they were in when they first arrived." Robert's heart clenched at the news. Over the past few weeks, the twins had made significant progress, beginning to open up and act like normal children their age. Seeing that progress threatened was painful. "I'll talk to them," Robert said, heading for the door. In the girls' room, Robert found Emily and Olivia huddled together on the bed, clinging to their teddy bears. Their wide, frightened eyes turned to him as he entered. "Hello, sweethearts," he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Is everything okay?" Emily bit her lip, clearly fighting back tears. "The monster is coming for us, isn't he?" The question hit Robert like a punch. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "No, Emily, I promised I'd protect you, remember, and I always keep my promises." Olivia, usually the quieter of the two, spoke in a whisper. "But what if he's stronger than you?" Robert felt a surge of determination. He took the girl's small hands in his. "Listen, both of you. No matter what happens, no matter how scary things seem, I will keep you safe. I have people here to help, and the police are on our side. Your father won't hurt you again." The girls exchanged that familiar look of silent communication. After a moment, they both nodded, a bit of the tension leaving their little bodies. "Now," Robert continued, forcing a smile, "how about we watch a movie together? You two can pick." While the twins eagerly debated which movie to watch, Robert exchanged a meaningful look with Susan, who stood in the doorway. They both knew the night would be long and potentially dangerous, but they would do everything possible to keep the girls unaware of the approaching threat. The hours passed slowly, the sound of rain and howling wind outside creating a tense atmosphere. Robert alternated between watching the movie with the girls and checking the security cameras on his tablet. Susan worked tirelessly, staying in constant contact with the authorities, providing the latest information and evidence against Mike. Around midnight, the alert went off. Robert's heart pounded as he saw the camera feed. A staggering figure approached the mansion gates. "Susan," he called out, voice tight. "He's here." Susan quickly scooped up the sleeping girls, who had dozed off during the movie. "I'm taking them to the safe room," she said, referring to the reinforced space Robert had prepared for precisely this scenario. Robert nodded, his eyes not leaving the screen. He watched with a mix of anger and pity as Mike Johnson, visibly drunk, yelled and shook the gates. "I know you're in there," Mike's voice echoed, distorted by rain and alcohol. "Give me back my daughters, you child thief." Robert activated the silent alarm, knowing the police were already en route. He then headed to the front door, where his security team was stationed. "Don't let him in," Robert instructed. "But don't hurt him unless absolutely necessary." The sound of bending metal made Robert spin around. To his horror, Mike had somehow forced the gates open. He stumbled across the yard, cursing and raving. "Thompson!" Mike shouted, his face twisted with drunken fury. "I know you're here. Where are my girls?" Robert took a deep breath, knowing he had to stall until the police arrived. He opened the door, stepping out into the torrential rain. "Mr. Johnson," he called, keeping his voice steady, "you shouldn't be here. Please leave before things get worse for you." Mike let out a bitter laugh. "Worse? How could things get worse?" "You stole my daughters." "Your daughters are safe," Robert replied, feeling anger boil within. "Away from you and your abuse." His words seemed to strike Mike like a slap. For a moment, he wavered. "You don't understand," he mumbled, his voice nearly lost in the rain. "I love them. I lost control sometimes." Robert stepped forward, compassion battling anger in his chest. "Mike, think about what you're doing. Think about Emily and Olivia. They deserve a life without fear, without violence." For a moment, it seemed Robert's words had penetrated the alcoholic haze surrounding Mike. His shoulders sagged, and he swayed unsteadily. But then, as if a switch had flipped, rage returned to his eyes. With an animalistic roar, Mike charged at Robert. The security guards reacted instantly, intercepting Mike before he could reach Robert. A chaotic scuffle ensued, with Mike flailing violently, shouting obscenities and threats. Suddenly, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Blue and red lights illuminated the chaotic scene as police cars rushed onto the property. "Police, everyone freeze." Mike, seeing the officers approach, seemed to finally grasp the gravity of his situation. All fight left his body, and he collapsed on the muddy ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," he whimpered between sobs. I never meant to hurt them. I didn't know how to be a good father." The officers advanced cautiously, guns still drawn. Robert stepped forward, hands raised to show he was no threat. "Officers," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "This man is Mike Johnson. He's the father of the 2 girls under my protection." One of the policemen, a middle-aged man with experienced eyes, moved closer. "Mr. Thompson, we got your alert. Can you tell us what happened here?" Robert began to explain, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. As he spoke, he watched Mike, who remained on the ground, muttering incoherently. Suddenly, Mike lifted his head, his red, swollen eyes focusing on Robert. There was a moment of confusion in his gaze, followed by a spark of recognition. "Mr. Thompson," Mike said, his voice ragged with emotion, You were my boss at the construction company." Robert felt the air leave his lungs. He stared at Mike, truly looked at him, for the first time since this entire situation began. And then, like lightning cutting through the dark night, the memory hit him. Mike Johnson. The promising young man who had started as an apprentice at Robert's construction firm nearly a decade ago. The dedicated employee who, over time, began arriving late, making mistakes, reeking of alcohol even in the morning. "Mike," Robert whispered, the realization making him dizzy. I remember you." The police watched the scene warily, clearly puzzled by the sudden shift in dynamics. Susan, who had returned after securing the girls, stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Robert's shoulder. Mike let out a bitter laugh that turned into a sob. "You fired me," he said, his voice full of accusation and shame. "You said I was a liability, that you couldn't trust me around heavy equipment." Robert felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He remembered that day, the pain in young Mike's eyes, the smell of alcohol on his breath as he begged for another chance. I'm sorry, Mike," Robert said, his voice cracking. "I should have done more. I should have offered help instead of just firing you." Mike shook his head, tears streaming down his filthy face. "It wasn't your fault. I was already lost. After I lost the job, things just got worse. I drank more, got angry at everything." The police, sensing the situation had calmed, moved in again. The older officer signaled to his colleagues, indicating they should cuff Mike. "Mr. Johnson," the officer said firmly but not unkindly, "we need you to come with us. We have questions about the accusations of abuse and neglect." Mike didn't resist as they handcuffed him. He kept his eyes on Robert, an array of emotions flickering across his face. "I hurt them," he said softly, almost talking to himself. My girls, my Jennifer, I hurt them so many times. I'm a monster. Robert felt his heart twist at those words. He remembered his own father, the nights of terror, the bruises hidden under long sleeves. He also remembered his father's fight to overcome alcoholism, his tears of remorse, his years of hard work to rebuild trust. "Mike," Robert said, stepping forward, "what you did was terrible, inexcusable. But recognizing it, that's the first step. If you really want to change her, if you truly want to be better for your daughters, then there's hope." Mike looked at Robert, his eyes filled with despair and the faintest spark of hope. Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Robert took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know, Mike. What you've done caused deep damage. But if you're willing to do the hard work, to seek help and truly change and maybe have in time, there could be a chance for healing." The police started guiding Mike toward the squad car. As they led him away, he turned one last time to Robert. "Take care of them, please. They deserve so much more than I could give." Robert nodded solemnly, watching as Mike was placed in the police car. The rain had now lessened to a gentle drizzle, as though nature itself acknowledged that the storm, both literal and metaphorical, was passing. When the police finally departed, lights flashing in the darkness, Robert found himself alone with Susan in the muddy yard. He suddenly felt utterly exhausted, the weight of the night's events, and the unexpected revelations pressing down on him. "Robert," Susan said softly, "are you all right?" He shook his head, unable to find words for the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Understanding, Susan guided him gently back into the house. In the living room, Robert collapsed into his favorite armchair, his gaze lost in the firelight. Susan sat beside him, waiting patiently for him to process all that had happened. "I could have done more," Robert finally said, his voice low and filled with regret. "When I fired him, I saw the signs. I knew he was struggling, but I was so focused on protecting the company, keeping things running smoothly." Susan placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Robert, you can't blame yourself for Mike's actions. What he did was his choice, not yours." Robert nodded slowly, but guilt still shadowed his eyes. "I know, but I can't help thinking, what if I had offered help instead of firing him? What if I had done more to support employees who were struggling?" He stood abruptly, walking to the window. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind a washed, silent world. "This has to change, Susan," he said, his voice gathering strength. "I can't undo what happened to Mike, or to Emily and Olivia, but I can make sure I do better in the future." Susan joined him by the window, understanding and support in her gaze. "What do you have in mind?" Robert turned to face her, eyes shining with renewed determination. "I'm going to implement support programs in my company, help for employees with addiction issues, counseling, family support, and not just in my company. I'll use my influence to encourage other businesses to do the same." He paused, ideas rushing through his mind. "And children, so many children like Emily and Olivia, stuck in abusive situations with no one to help. I'll start a foundation, Susan, a foundation to help children who are victims of abuse, to provide resources and support they desperately need." Susan smiled, pride evident in her expression. "That's wonderful, Robert. You'll make a real difference in so many lives." Robert nodded, a sense of purpose taking root within him. "It's the least I can do." Emily and Olivia, they opened my eyes to a reality I chose to ignore for too long. Now that I've seen it, I can't just close my eyes again. At that moment, a small sound caught their attention. Turning, they saw Emily and Olivia standing in the living room doorway, hands clasped, their eyes wide with questions. "Mr. Robert," Emily called timidly. "The monster, Daddy, is he gone?" Robert knelt down, opening his arms. The girls ran to him, snuggling in his embrace. "Yes, sweethearts," he said softly. "He's gone. You're safe now." Olivia looked up, tears shining in her eyes. "For good?" Robert hesitated a moment. exchanging a glance with Susan. "For now," he said carefully. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here to protect you and take care of you." The girls nodded, pressing closer to him. Robert hugged them tightly, feeling a wave of love and protectiveness wash over him. While he held Emily and Olivia, Robert made a silent promise. He would use this experience, painful as it was, as a catalyst for positive change, not just for these two precious girls, but for countless other children and families facing similar struggles. The night had been long and tumultuous, full of shocking revelations and intense emotions. But as the first rays of morning light filtered through the window, Robert felt a surge of hope blossom in his chest. The path ahead would be challenging, no doubt. There would be legal hurdles to overcome, emotional wounds to heal, and a long, slow process of rebuilding. But as he looked at the small figures in his arms and at Susan, who smiled encouragingly, Robert knew he was not alone in this journey. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed world brimming with possibility. And in that moment, cradling Emily and Olivia, Robert Thompson made a silent vow to be the change he wanted to see in the world, starting right there in that very room with two little lives that fate had entrusted to him. Morning sunlight bathed Robert Thompson's mansion in a golden glow, as if announcing the start of a new chapter. In the guest room, Jennifer Johnson nervously straightened her clothes, her anxious eyes fixed on the door. After weeks in the hospital, she was finally ready to be reunited with her daughters. The sound of small, hurried footsteps in the hallway made her heart race. The door opened, and there they were, Emily and Olivia, their tiny hands clasped together, eyes wide with anticipation. "Mommy!" they shouted in unison, rushing into Jennifer's open arms. The embrace was intense, laden with all the emotions held back by weeks of separation. Jennifer held her daughters tightly, silent tears rolling down her cheeks as she breathed in the familiar scent of their hair. "My babies," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so much." Robert and Susan watched from the doorway, their own eyes brimming with tears at the poignant reunion. They exchanged a look of mutual understanding. This was just the first step in a long healing journey for the Johnson family. In the days that followed, Robert's mansion became a haven for recovery and new beginnings. Jennifer, still fragile physically and emotionally, found comfort in the constant presence of her daughters and the unwavering support of Robert and Susan. The family began intensive therapy sessions, both individually and as a group. Robert's office was temporarily transformed into a cozy space for these sessions, with plush pillows on the floor and therapeutic toys scattered everywhere. During one of these sessions, Emily, usually the more talkative twin, surprised everyone with an unexpected revelation. "Sometimes," she said softly, absent-mindedly playing with a doll, "I pretended Mr. Robert was our real dad." A heavy silence followed, laden with complex emotions. Jennifer struggled against a wave of guilt, while Robert felt a mix of honor and responsibility settle over him. "The therapist is Dr. Lawrence skillfully guided the conversation, helping Emily explore her feelings without judgment. Slowly, both Emily and Olivia opened up further, expressing fears and hopes they had kept hidden for so long. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Robert worked tirelessly to ensure a stable future for the Johnson family. One sunny afternoon, he called Jennifer for a talk in his office. "Jennifer," he began gently but seriously, "I'd like to offer you a job at my company." Jennifer's eyes widened in surprise. "But I don't have any special qualifications, Mr. Thompson." Robert smiled encouragingly. "You have strength, resilience, and an incredible work ethic. That's more valuable than any degree. We'll start you as an administrative assistant, with opportunities for training and advancement." Jennifer felt tears of gratitude prick her eyes. I don't know how to thank you." "There's more," Robert went on. "I own a safe apartment in the city center. It's yours, for as long as you need it, for you and the girls to start over." Jennifer covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Mr. Thompson, Robert, this is too much. I can't accept." "You can and you should," Robert insisted gently. "Think of it as an investment. In you, in the girls, in a better future for all of us." That evening at dinner, the news was shared with Emily and Olivia. they received the idea of a new home with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "We'll still see Mr. Robert and Miss Susan, right?" Olivia asked, her voice tiny and worried. "Of course you will, sweetheart," Susan assured her, reaching out to take the girl's hand across the table. "We'll always be around." Over the following days, a noticeable change took place in Emily and Olivia, freed from the constant fear that had defined their lives for so long. Their true personalities began to emerge. Emily, always the more outgoing twin, developed a love for dance. Robert hired a private teacher, and soon the mansion was filled with music and laughter as Emily twirled through the rooms. Olivia, on the other hand, revealed herself to be a born artist. Her drawings, once dark and frightening, now burst with vibrant colors and scenes of happiness. An entire wall in the new apartment was dedicated to displaying her artwork. Jennifer, for her part, threw herself into her new job with fierce determination. She mastered each new skill with enthusiasm, her confidence growing every day. Robert watched proudly as she blossomed in her new role, earning the respect of colleagues and superiors alike. Susan proved invaluable during this transition. She helped Jennifer navigate the complex legal aspects of her new situation, from gaining full custody of the girls to finalizing her divorce from Mike. "You're doing the right thing, Jennifer," Susan reassured her on a particularly tough afternoon when doubts threatened to overwhelm the young mother. "Your daughters have a chance at a new beginning thanks to your courage." Meanwhile, Robert was busy implementing significant changes in his own company. Inspired by his experience with the Johnson family, he introduced a comprehensive employee assistance program. "None of us are immune to problems," he announced at a board meeting. "Whether it's alcoholism, depression, or family issues, it's our responsibility to create an environment where our employees feel safe to seek help." The program included free counseling, support groups, and even an emergency fund for employees in crisis. The initiative was met with skepticism by some, but Robert stood firm in his vision. One afternoon, as he walked through the office, Robert overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. "You won't believe it," one employee said to another. "My wife, she finally agreed to seek treatment for her depression, all because of Mr. Thompson's new program." Robert felt a lump in his throat, moved to realize the real impact of his changes. Back at the mansion, Robert found Emily and Olivia playing in the garden, their laughter ringing in the late afternoon air. Jennifer sat nearby with an accounting book in her lap, studying for a course she'd decided to take. "Mr. Robert!" Emily shouted, running to hug him. "Look what Olivia drew." Olivia, shy as ever, approached with a drawing in her hands. It was a colorful representation of everyone in the mansion. Robert, Susan, Jennifer, the twins, even Martha the housekeeper, all holding hands, big smiles on their faces. "It's our family," Olivia explained softly. Robert felt his heart swell. "It's beautiful, Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely beautiful." That night, lying in bed, Robert reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months, from a chance encounter on a rainy night to a complete transformation of lives, including his own. He knew the road ahead would still be challenging. There were wounds that would take years to heal, fears that wouldn't vanish overnight. But gazing at Olivia's drawing, now placed in a place of honor on his bedside table, Robert felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The storm had passed, leaving behind new paths of healing and hope, and Robert Thompson was determined to walk beside the Johnson family every step of the way, no matter where it led. The late afternoon sun bathed the small yard in golden light, creating a nearly magical scene. Children's laughter filled the air, blending with bird song and the soft rustle of leaves. Emily and Olivia, almost 5 now, raced across the lawn, their braids bouncing behind them. "Catch me, Liv," Emily called, skillfully dodging her sister. Olivia, determined, picked up her pace, her eyes shining with excitement. "You won't get away this time." From the porch of the cozy yet modest house, Jennifer Johnson watched her daughters with a radiant smile and tearful eyes. 6 months had passed since they moved here, and the transformation was almost unbelievable. Jennifer took a deep breath, savoring the scent of the flowers she herself had planted. Her hand subconsciously touched the ID badge on her shirt. Jennifer Johnson, Assistant Manager. Her recent promotion was a testament to her hard work and dedication. The sound of an approaching car made Jennifer turn. Her smile widened when she recognized the familiar vehicle. "Girls," she called, "look who's here." Emily and Olivia stopped their game, faces lighting up with excitement. When Robert Thompson emerged from the car, carrying a stack of brightly wrapped presents, the twins squealed with delight. "Uncle Rob!" they cried in unison, running toward him. Robert barely had time to put the gifts down before being engulfed in a double hug. He laughed, lifting the girls into his arms. "My little ones," he said, planting a kiss on each forehead. "You've grown. Soon, you'll be taller than me." Jennifer approached, a warm smile on her face. "Robert, it's so good to see you. Come on in, please. Coffee's almost ready." Inside the house, evidence of a happy, stable life was everywhere. Olivia's colorful drawings adorned the walls, alongside photos of Emily at her dance classes. A framed picture over the fireplace showed Jennifer at her recent graduation. She had completed a business administration course with honors. As the girls excitedly tore into their gifts, Robert and Jennifer sat at the kitchen table, steaming cups of coffee in front of them. "How's work going?" Robert asked, genuine interest shining in his eyes. Jennifer smiled, pride lighting up her face. "Wonderfully. The team's fantastic, and I'm learning so much every day. Last week, I led my first project meeting." Robert nodded with satisfaction. "I heard the feedback was excellent." "You have a natural talent for leadership, Jennifer." A slight blush crept into Jennifer's cheeks. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream," she admitted quietly. "A year ago, I couldn't even imagine a future for me and the girls. And now..." Emotion overflowed as her voice trailed off, tears glistening in her eyes. Robert gently placed his hand over hers. "You did this, Jennifer," he said firmly. "Your courage, your determination, you gave your daughters and yourself a new chance at life." At that moment, Emily and Olivia ran over, arms full of new toys and books. "Mommy, look!" Emily exclaimed, showing off a painting set. Uncle Rob brought real paints. Olivia, quieter but equally enthusiastic, hugged a large book of fairy tales to her chest. "And new stories to read before bedtime," she said softly. Jennifer smiled, pulling her daughters into a hug. "That's wonderful, sweeties. What do we say to Uncle Rob?" "Thank you, Uncle Rob," the girls sang in unison before dashing off to explore their presents further. Robert watched them with a contented smile. Then, remembering something, he turned to Jennifer. "Oh, I almost forgot. I have news about the foundation," he said, his tone growing more serious. Jennifer leaned in, interested. Over the past months, she had taken an active role in the development of the New Dawn Foundation, created by Robert to help abuse victims. "We got final approval," Robert announced, unable to hide his excitement. "Starting next month, we'll be officially up and running. We already have partnerships with 3 shelters and 2 counseling centers." Jennifer's eyes widened with surprise and delight. "Robert, that's incredible. So many families will be helped." "And that's not all," Robert continued. "Remember your idea for a mentorship program for women leaving abusive situations? The board loved it. We want you to lead the project." Jennifer was momentarily speechless, her mouth hanging open. "Me? But, Robert, I'm not sure I'm qualified." Robert shook his head, smiling kindly. "No one is more qualified than you, Jennifer. Your experience, your compassion, your strength, you're exactly what these women need." Tears of emotion glistened in Jennifer's eyes. I don't know what to say. Thank you, Robert, for everything." Before Robert could respond, the doorbell rang. Jennifer frowned, puzzled. "Strange. I'm not expecting anyone." She got up to answer, with Robert close behind. When the door opened, an explosion of color and sound greeted them. "Surprise!" Susan stood there, holding a huge cake. Behind her was a crowd of smiling people, Jennifer's co-workers, the girls' new friends from school, neighbors, all holding balloons, gifts, and beaming smiles. Emily and Olivia rushed over at the commotion, their eyes wide with wonder and joy at the sight of the crowd. "Happy birthday, my little ones," Susan exclaimed, walking in with the cake. "You didn't really think we'd forget, did you?" The twins froze in surprise for a moment, before erupting in squeals of glee, jumping up and down, clapping their hands. Jennifer turned to Robert, who wore an innocent smile. "Did you plan all this?" He shrugged, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Maybe I helped a little bit." But it was all Susan's idea. The next few hours were a whirlwind of joy and celebration. The small yard overflowed with laughter, music, and the delicious smell of barbecue. Emily and Olivia, each wearing a birthday princess crown, dashed around, their faces glowing with happiness. Jennifer, surrounded by friends and colleagues, radiated confidence and contentment. Robert watched her from a distance, amazed at the transformation of the timid, frightened woman he had met just over 6 months ago. As afternoon turned to evening, colorful lights brightened the yard, creating a magical atmosphere. The children played tag, their laughter echoing in the night. The adults chatted in small groups, the air filled with stories and plans for the future. In a quiet moment, Robert found himself alone, watching the scene before him. Susan approached, offering him a glass of champagne. "A penny for your thoughts," she said softly. Robert smiled, accepting the drink. "I was just thinking about how life can change in such a short time." Susan nodded, following his gaze to where Jennifer laughed with a group of friends, and the twins danced happily with their new classmates. "You did this, Robert," she said. "You gave this family a second chance." Robert shook his head modestly. "No, Susan. They gave me a second chance. A chance to make a difference, to have a purpose bigger than just accumulating wealth and power." He paused, taking a sip of his drink before continuing. "You know, for years I wondered why I survived my own rough childhood, why I managed to rise above it and succeed when so many others didn't. Now I know. For this," Susan finished softly, indicating the happy scene in front of them. Robert nodded, feeling a surge of emotion. "For this," he agreed. At that moment, Emily and Olivia ran over, their cheeks flushed with excitement. "Uncle Rob, Aunt Susan," Emily cried, "come dance with us." Olivia, shy but just as eager, grabbed Robert's hand. "Please?" she asked quietly. Robert exchanged a playful look with Susan before setting his champagne aside. "How could we refuse such a charming invitation?" he teased, letting the girls pull him toward the makeshift dance floor. As he spun around with the twins, listening to their gleeful laughter, Robert felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude wash over him. The path that led him here had been long and often painful, but every step had been worth it. The night wore on, filled with music, laughter, and the pure joy of new possibilities. And as the stars shone overhead, Robert Thompson knew with unshakable certainty that this was only the beginning of a bright new chapter, not just for Emily, Olivia, and Jennifer, but for him as well. The single act of compassion that began on a rainy night had blossomed into something far greater, touching countless lives and opening the door to a future filled with hope and love. And as Robert watched the happy family before him, he made a silent promise to continue this work, to spread light where darkness once prevailed, one new dawn at a time.